So the question for today's video is whether you should be able to use the Fujifilm X-T5 as a professional camera. And my answer for that would be yes, of course you can. So I've used the Fujifilm X-T5 now for almost 2 years, and I've used it for a number of different occasions, both for personal work and for paid gigs as well. I would say the X-T5 for me has been almost a Swiss Army knife of cameras. I've used it for portraits, shooting couples, events, street photography, architecture, and even a little bit of video. In fact, I'm actually using the Fujifilm X-T5 to film this video right now. And for the most part, I have no qualms about using the X-T5 in both a personal and professional context. So why would you consider using the X-T5 do-it-all camera for your workflow? The one thing that drew me to the camera in the first place was the excellent Fujifilm colors. I've used a number of different camera brands in the past, including Sony, Nikon, Panasonic Lumix, and even Ricoh GR. And out of all of them, I would say the Fujifilm colors have been my favorite in terms of ease of use and flexibility. And of course, you've got the great film simulations that are included with the camera, most Fujifilm cameras. Another thing is the aesthetic element. The Fujifilm X-T5 is undoubtedly nicest looking digital cameras that I've ever used. I get lots of compliments from clients and friends about how this camera looks, with its retro dials and film camera aesthetics. Another great point about this camera is the versatility and functionality of the camera. I mean, there's a lot to say about Fujifilm allowing the use of third-party lenses for their X mount. And over the years, I've used a bunch of different lens brands, including excellent Sigma and Viltrox lenses. And I would say they work great on the Fujifilm system overall. And it just gives you a bit more options in terms of affordable lenses and just various lenses to experiment with creatively, which is great. More in terms of the functionality of the camera, I find the menu system on Fujifilm probably better than some others compared to Sony, for example. To me, it just feels fairly intuitive and easy to navigate, and I rarely have problems with trying to find the setting or change the setting on the camera. And of course, the manual dials on top of the camera help a lot in terms of finding the right settings when you're shooting. In terms of the ergonomics, say the X-T5 has decent ergonomics. It has a little side grip on the right hand side, and the actual size of the body and how light it is has been great. Even on all day shoots, haven't had any issues carrying the camera around. It's fairly small, fairly compact, and easy to carry around or stash away in a bag. Now the plus side of the X-T5 sensor is the 40 megapixel resolution files, which allows for cropping in post, and is quite useful for really zooming in and dialing in on the details of a shot, and also helps you with the composition as well, so that you're only including the things that you want in the frame. The downside, again, is the sensor itself, the APS-C or cropped sensor that the Fujifilm cameras, most compact Fujifilm cameras use for their X line. There's to say the APS-C sensor on the X-T5 is excellent. It gives a really nice resolution, and the images that come out of it are really pleasing and sharp enough for most applications. The only major downside with the Fujifilm X-T5 is its dynamic range. What do I mean by dynamic range? So in the case of shooting, for example, in very, very dark scenes, so if you're shooting an event or a party, you might have difficulty recovering some of the shadows in post. It typically ends up quite noisy. In my personal experience, it starts to get quite noisy from about 2000 or 3200 native ISO onwards, where 6400 ISO is pretty much unusable in my experience when shooting photos. Again, this is not really a fault of the X-T5. If you're buying into the APS-C ecosystem, it's something you should be aware of. Just because a full frame sensor is quite a bit bigger and will obviously be able to collect more light. It is just something to be aware of when you're choosing your next camera. But yeah, the crop sensor is not ideal for really low light photography, I would say. So if you're into your event or astrophotography or night photography, perhaps I would consider something more of a full frame or even medium format sensor, just to be able to gather more light. You can of course offset that by getting a really fast prime lens to help you out, and it does help a lot. You can obviously also clean up the image quite a bit using Lightroom and Photoshop in post, so there are ways around it. Generally, if you're working a lot on night shoots and trying to do professional work with photography, I would consider getting perhaps a full frame body as your main workhorse and have the X-T5 as your backup or secondary camera for scenes with more light. Another downside of the Fujifilm X-T5 is the autofocus. And in my experience, I would say the autofocus is not as bad as people say it is, but it definitely is not as strong as something like a Sony A7 IV is, for example. In this respect, Fujifilm slightly lags behind the big three camera companies, such as Nikon, Canon, and Sony. I would say from my experience, the Fujifilm gets probably 7 out of 10 shots in a fast-paced environment. Obviously, it's not such a problem when you're in a environment where you're shooting products or on a tripod for architecture, for example, or even some static portraits. You'll probably have a better hit rate, but I would not recommend shooting things like sports with this camera, just because the autofocus cannot, I would say, probably wouldn't keep up with really fast-paced action, even though the camera is capable of shooting at 14 frames per second. I'd say the autofocus is not meant for sports. And if you're shooting sports in a low lit environment, then yeah, forget about it. It's not going to be great for that. These are fairly specific use cases, whereas probably for 85 to 90% of people, the camera would be absolutely more than enough, even for paid work. You could do quite a lot with this camera. Talking about the video performance, the video on the Fujifilm X-T5 is generally very good. I like the colors that come straight from the camera. Same with the photos. I don't use it extensively as a video camera. For example, there are some practical things that are slightly annoying. I mean, it's not really meant to be a vlogging camera or like something to shoot videos of yourself, for example, because the screen it doesn't flip out. so it can be tricky to monitor yourself for video. So if you're going to be using it for video, and if you want to shoot videos of yourself or vlogs, I would recommend having a monitor mounted on top, and that would be okay, I guess, for video. But there are probably better options like the Fujifilm X-M5, for example, for shooting videos of yourself, on vlog style videos. Conclusion is the X-T5 is a great all-rounder. It's kind of a jack of all trades but a master of none. There's not one thing that it's outstanding at, but it's just useful for lots of different situations. It's fairly compact. It has interchangeable lenses. It has great aesthetics, and it's really fun to shoot. Actually, yeah, I'd say the main benefit of the Fujifilm X-T5 is that it's a camera that makes you want to pick it up and go out and shoot. You can't say the same for a lot of other cameras, which are probably a lot more practical and a lot more boring to use, I'd say. They are just tools to get the job done. Whereas the X-T5 has something more of a... It's just a fun camera to use. It's a fun camera to shoot, whether it's film profiles, with the dials, and the way it feels in the hand. It's just a great overall camera, overall everyday camera. I wouldn't say it's like the best tool for a professional setting. There are a lot more competent cameras. One thing to mention as well is the price. So I wouldn't say that the X-T5 is one of those influencer cameras like the X100 series, for example, so the prices are not crazy. You can pick one up used fairly easily for a reasonable price. And the best thing about it, obviously, is that it has interchangeable lenses, whereas the X100 series does not. And that goes a long way for making it more viable as a professional tool compared to the fixed lens on the X100. I will continue using it for both professional and personal use. For example, like these videos, I'll probably continue shooting it on the X-T5, but I am considering getting another full frame camera to help with my professional work, for low light work. And that's all I have to say about the Fujifilm X-T5.